Hey, it's Clay. Welcome to another video. Today we are going to talk about guitar amplifiers and try to clear up some confusion between the treble control and the presence control. Now, a lot of amps will have some EQ controls on the front, bass, mid, treble. Some amps also add what is called presence. And I think from a very introductory or basic perspective, both the treble control and the presence control seem to affect the high frequencies in your amplifier. And that's true. But if you have ever wondered what is the difference between the two, why do we have both of these controls, are they redundant, I'm going to try to explain from a circuit perspective what is going on. And hopefully this can shed some light on it, and you may want to use one and not the other. So let's go ahead and dive in. Now, to help identify this, we are going to take a look at this. This is the Fender Bassman Model 5 F6A. For this portion of the circuit, this is also equally used in like the JTM 45 or the Marshall Plexi, or probably even the JCM 800. So a very commonly used topography here for what we're going to be talking about. And I want to identify first this part of the circuit. Let's actually try that again. Is our tone stack. Okay, you can see right here we've got treble, right here we've got bass, right here we've got middle. So this is where your three tone controls are located or stacked, quote unquote, together. And basically they're comprised of some very basic and straightforward filters, passive tone stack filters, which include some capacitor and some amount of resistance with a path to ground. So basically what happens is the signal is coming out of right here, the plate of this triode gain stage 12AX7 travels on this wire, and then it hits this point right here. And at this point, it has, I kind of think of it as three separate paths, right? You've got the treble frequencies will travel through this very low value capacitor. Then you've got a slope resistor, which will help skew the bass frequencies right here. And then what's left over is the mid-range frequencies that can pass right here. And then depending on how much resistance they see from the treble, the bass, and the mid controls, they either pass the filter and find their way out this way, or they find an easier path to ground. And electricity likes to take the path of least resistance to ground if it can. So that's a kind of a very crude and rudimentary way of explaining these filters. Okay, so that's our tone stack. Then right here is our presence control. You can see they're located pretty close together on the schematic, but the truth of the matter is that they are in a very different part of the circuit, because if you look over here, you've got the output transformer. So after the signal has gone through the preamp, through the tone stack, through the phase inverters, and through these two output tubes, it joins right here and goes out to the speaker. So it's actually taking some of the signal that has already gone through all that amplification and shaping and through the transformer, and as it is ready to go out to the speaker, it bleeds some of that off on this line. This is called a negative feedback loop. Now it hits this resistor, which gives it some amount of pause, right? It's not 100% free path, otherwise the amp would not be functional. And then it can take to this point right here, and it can either mix kind of along these points into the long tail pair phase inverter, or it can hit this control. The presence control is a 5K variable resistor pot and a 0.1 microfarad capacitor. Now, let's talk about the difference now. So, first of all, the primary difference is the location. The fact that this treble control is right here in the preamp, right? The signal has gone through one gain stage, volume, second gain stage, then this is a cathode follower. So we're really in the preamp. Now this is at probably the very tail end of the preamp, but we're still at the preamp stage of amplification. We still have about half of the circuit to go through. So there's a lot of changing that will still happen to it. However, the presence control is affecting the signal in the negative feedback loop. So it is affecting the signal that has already gone through the entire amplifier. It's already been affected in every way that it can through the circuit. And then the next thing to realize is the treble control, being here in the tone stack, is affecting the audio signal directly. Whereas the presence control, because it's in the negative feedback loop, the negative feedback loop is more of a passive or a secondary effect on the primary audio signal. Because what the negative feedback loop does is it allows a portion of the signal to come back and basically be placed on itself. And when you do that, you're actually it's almost kind of like a Stratocaster when you take the neck pickup and the middle pickup and you put them in position 2, and there's some phase cancellation. So the signal becomes kind of thinner and honkier, quieter. That's not directly what's happening here, but that concept is accurate, where you're having the more of the signal that you allow to negatively feed back, you're going to decrease volume, you're going to decrease gain, you're going to change the frequency response to be flatter. So, it's going to be less mid-range peaky, and more bass, more treble. You're going to stabilize the effect of the feel of the amp a little bit more. So it has quite a number of effects. And again, as you increase negative feedback, you decrease gain. Okay, so it's kind of confusing because it's backwards. It's an inverse relationship. So the higher this resistor is, so you're resisting the negative feedback, you're going to decrease the amount of negative feedback. Okay, so what's going on here with the presence control, you've got this negative feedback line. And it looks at this and says, hey, this is a path to ground. I love paths to ground. Well, first of all, there's this capacitor here. And so depending on where you move the wiper of the pot, you can either allow the capacitor to go right here, which basically skips the pot entirely, and it just allows the high frequencies to go straight to ground. So remember it's backwards, so by allowing the high frequencies in the negative feedback loop to go to ground, they do not feed back into the signal, and so it's actually, the high frequencies are not going to cancel, so the high frequencies are going to be boosted. By sending the high frequencies in the negative feedback loop to ground, you're actually going to boost the high frequencies in the overall sound of the amp. Because basically what you're doing is you're allowing the mid and low frequencies to phase cancel so that they are repressed a little bit. And so the presence control gives you some amount of ability to kind of move or select how much of that happens. So the primary difference as I think about it, number one, you need to use your ears, right? If the treble control does one thing and the presence control does one thing, you need to use your ears. But the way that I would think about it is like this. I would think about the the treble control, because it's in the preamp, it's going to have a little bit more effect on the character of the amp, the distortion of the amp, the way that the amp feels and plays. And I would look more at the presence control as more of a final EQ in a way to kind of affect the output level of the amp. And again, they both do affect treble frequencies, but in a little bit of a different way. And so, for example, when you're in the preamp, and if you have a lot of treble in your preamp, right, and if you're running the amp really hot, some of that treble might, let's say you're running this volume control right here on 10 out of 10. And if you run the treble control on 10 out of 10, it's going to go into this phase invert. It's going to slam that thing. And it's going to create some harmonic distortion. And it may cause the amp to sound a little bit harsh. And so the character of that distortion is just, there's too much clipping going on those treble frequencies. So by turning the treble down in the preamp control, you can help tame that distortion character to be a little more pleasant. And then, but let's say you do that, and now all of a sudden the overall, you've got the distortion character of the amp dialed where you want, but maybe it's not sitting in the mix correctly. Then you could use the presence control to help shape your final EQ level, maybe to boost the presence so that you, without necessarily doing as much to change that distortion character, you're just giving it a little bit more of a final cut. Ultimately, though, this is really just open for experimentation, but I hope this shed a little bit of light that there is a difference, and it will have a definite effect on how the amp functions and what the controls can do to make the amp sound its best. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have any thoughts or questions or comments, let me know down below. I know this one gets a little bit technical, but I hope this helps explain it for you. I'll see you again soon. Thanks. Bye.